in the kind of difference that is infinitely internally differentiated. This is the exact same diagram we had for, by the way, for the second hypothesis of Plato's Parmenides. You might recognize this.
Something, right?
Huh?
The dyad, the infinite dyad, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So this is, the one as being, right? And so you got one and being here, one and being instead of subject and object, but it's the exact same thing, right? Because since each side is both sides, we can see here the subject is really subject object, but that subject object is really subject object, right? And on to infinity, right? So once you have that kind of internal differentiation, you don't just have one difference, but you of necessity have an infinitely self-differentiated whole. And that's—
No, there's only 12.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, and you could also like make that recursive from every, let's say, S node to every other S node. And so you really, it kind of emphasizes the point as well. So
it's a generator, right? That's the overflowing, is the generation of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So once you have one internal difference is the same as infinitely many. Yeah, there you get the overflowing metaphor too. But it has to be. Yeah, it has to be.
But this is at the second level.
An absolute difference for it to do that. Just any difference won't do.
Thought of another thing. You could say that being overflows, but you can't say that Dasein overflows, because Dasein is at a different level.
You can say it, but you can't think it.
You're right. No, good correction. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's another reason, why being and existence are not synonymous, and which we often fall into. Okay, yeah. So if everybody gets that, then everybody kind of gets why the one category as being itself self-different is infinite difference. It's a sheer plurality of differences, each one of which is itself infinitely different. So you have infinite worlds within infinite worlds. And so that's what Kant didn't see. That's what Kant didn't see. And so Hegel's point is obviously that from the one category, all possible content is comprehensible, and all possible content is internally generated by the one absolute difference. And so that's why there's only one category. But we have to understand how each one of these differences can have the status of a species that's other than another species, because we don't want them all to all of a sudden become the same. Would be in the night in which all cows are black. That would be what he accuses Schelling, the mistake he accuses Schelling of making. Okay, enough historical sidelong glances. Okay, so he says that difference appears as a plurality of categories. Okay, now we can kind of understand why. And then what's the problem with idealism? It expresses the simple unity of self-consciousness and being, and immediately makes it the essence, or what fundamentally is, without comprehending it as an absolutely negative essence, because only then do we get the plurality of differences. Right? I mean, it's a great expression. For only this absolutely negative essence has in its own self-negation, i.e. determinateness, or the difference itself. It's magnificent. Okay, so hopefully that makes a lot of sense now. Right, and then the second idealism just says, asserts that there's a certain number of these differences, and be they 12 or Kantian 12 or Aristotelian 10, right, without comprehending that there must indeed be an infinite number of species. Yeah, although I'm gonna hold back on that. I'm not 100% sure on that. But the point is that you cannot think absolute difference and think of it as having, just by virtue of its own structure, a determinate number of species, 10, 12, 20, whatever, 100. All right.
Can that one sentence that you just had highlighted, Bo, for while it is in the pure eye, in the pure understanding itself, that difference itself gets underway, it is thereby posited that immediacy, issuing assurances, finding the given is to be abandoned here, and comprehension is to begin. I don't quite get the issuing assurances, finding the given is to be abandoned here.
Anyone want to take a stab at it?
Where is that sentence? I'm having
Down below, further down, one more sentence. Forward, yeah, right there.
So I'm just going to take a stab. Pure difference is what we've been describing, that everything that's differentiated has both sides on either side. And so that's where we get this sheer plurality, which means every distinction is mediated by every other distinction. Everything is completely and utterly, completely mediated. There is no possible immediacy anymore. And therefore, issuing assurances is pointing to some immediacy, or accepting that there's some given that's just immediately there. Once we have the notion of, yeah.
I see, okay. Yeah, the given being a category that is other than itself.
Right.
Right, okay. And in a sense, a priori is gone. I mean, this is talking about the a priori.
Givens always come from outside.
Yeah.
That's why you need to demonstrate necessity.
Mm-hmm. Right. So there is no like, okay, we're just going to start with X and then derive as much as we can from it, and then call that our system of truth or our system of reality or something like that. There's nothing that can, there's exactly, that would all becomes completely contingent and accidental. There's nothing that isn't mediated. And so nothing serves as, no one single element can ever serve as an appropriate starting point, which is why, why Hegel says somewhere, the truth is the whole. You have to think the whole, and you have to think the whole is internally differentiated if you want to, so to speak, walk the path of truth.
Yeah, and this is where he just hates the outside and the given, and throwing schemas and categories at things, and
Throwing.
And that's, he just and then in a way you could say, the way Kant went, oh look, Aristotle did his categories, let's just take those, and Hegel would say, well, those categories would be self-differentiating. They're within thought itself. They're within every distinction. Logically develop and derive them from the whole. Don't just grab them and throw them on.
Right.
So in other words, Aristotle might have been right, but let's do it the right way.
I mean, if we think absolute difference, then we can reconfigure, so to speak, the semantics of in, when we say, that all of these things are in thought. Now we're not thinking thought as a container with a bunch of marbles in it, and all those marbles would be the various contents. Right? That's I think our everyday notion of what something being in thought is like. And here with this absolute difference notion, we see that the interiority is of a completely different nature. That it's hard to express, and Hegel does his best here, and he gives us a lot of ways to talk about it. But it's definitely not a container of marbles.
All right, so we move to the next one.
I think so. Did anybody have last lingering questions?
Well, I don't want to get us off the subject or too far afield, but this method of thinking about reality does that preclude?
One where when we were getting towards the end and we were reading everything way too fast and I couldn't quite get it all put together again. Of course, there's always order it was together, but anyway. Trying to get at what the concrete thing, like, it's okay way up at the pure level. You can sort of see the unity. And I was having a hard time trying to get it like, how do you understand the world in terms of this, as it were? Because there you really do want to think there's objects out there and there's myself here, but that is only a perspective. And this is the original unity here, I think, that we're grasping onto, from which all those distinctions will flow. And so I was trying to piece together these things after the fact, as it were, without having had this insight to begin with, because the unity has to be sort of original. And I think we're right here at the cusp of that. We're pretty damn near the cusp of it here.
Right.
But to try and put those two, if you start from like normal empiricism or wherever, everything's already a mess and separated from each other. You can't sort of glue things back together because it's just two things glued back together. It has to sort of flow out of this original unity. And so, I haven't quite grokked this all the way through, but I think it's key to know this, that I think this is the source of that, what the claim of original unity when you get out to the messy world.
Yeah, that's the thing that is the major roadblock for me as well, for just kind of taking Hegel kind of as the theory of everything. Is that, if it winds up being a kind of a logic that remains after the asteroid kills all humans, then I can say, okay, that I can possibly grok, and go for. But just out of the gate, if it's like denying this logic existing after humans are gone, then it seems to me, at least, to be inadequate. I don't know what that says about me, if it just says I'm still rooted in my materialism or not, but maybe not necessarily.
I share that concern and that frustration, and all through the Kant, I was thinking I'm not a transcendental idealist. I'm actually a transcendental realist pretending. And that's basically that problem, because I remember even asking the Kant group, what happens when you shoot all the people? What's left over? And that way of thinking about it. But then thinking about, one of the things that I'm sort of beginning to realize from about the Hegel is that the concrete universal is the fully embodied thing. And in some sense, to say it wrong, because I don't know how to say it right yet, but it is that the ideas are really out there in the concrete objects in some sense. And that seems weird to say that way. But when I think about, there's that article from the mathematical guy, like in the 50s, like the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. Why should physicists, when they just take a pile of mathematics and play with it purely, all of a sudden that applies to the world? And you think that, well, maybe it can only be that way because the world is so structured that math can apply to it. And in that sense, the idea is out there in the world. I still think I'm thinking about it wrong, but there's a glimmer of a way of making it so it's not a spooky something in which, if you did kill all the people, whatever was left over would still embody ideas, as it were.
Yeah, I think Kant has that section on mathematics where there are rules for drawing in space. So if space is part of pure intuition, and the rule for drawing, of course, the rule is going to be also on the subjective side in Kant's account, right? Rules are from reason, not from. So I think mathematics, at least for Kant, is sort of mysteriously all on the subject side. But but there's a sense in which the noumena, or the thing in itself, has to be such that it allows math to be done by human beings in the way that it is, which kind of pushes the boundaries of his whole system, right? Because he wants he wants to say that there has to be some sort of conformity from one to the other, but he's not capable of drawing out why that would have to be so. It just he can tell at least that our conception or his conception of the new phenomena puts constraints on what can be true on the subject side and vice versa. But it doesn't quite map it all out.
And where does Hegel go with that?
I would say that Hegel doesn't start with them anywhere nearly as divided as Kant does. So Hegel doesn't have the skeptical gap. So Hegel really starts from what would Kant, in some sense, have arrived at had he done all of that mapping out. It would have committed him to pretty much throwing out the skeptical gap that he sort of attempts to maintain through his work, which is why so much of his work is just very difficult and fraught. But as one of the philosophers that some of us are enjoying are listening to makes the point that you kind of have to go through those weeds to start to understand German idealism in general, right? Or just philosophy even.
So, but to Tim's point, the only thing I would want to say is, if what we're talking about is about absolute difference holds, then there are necessarily an infinite number of minds, and so there's obviously not an infinite number of human beings. So that commits us to minds not being human. And so if all humans disappeared, that doesn't mean anything would change for anything, because of the necessity of an infinite number of minds. So there's always going to be, so to speak, a consciousness somewhere holding up the works.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you have to say that every difference is this consciousness? Whether it's material or not, whether it's conceived to be material, it is still the consciousness that is the difference.
Right.
And I'm still waiting to see, where Hegel fully goes with it. Then I'm waiting to see what people after who grappled with Hegel, where they went with it, what ideas they had in response to it. And obviously some people came out disagreeing because of probably implications. And other people may have grabbed onto it and then went, in the, let's say, the Karl Marx way, or, this way or that way, which I'm not studied enough to know. But, before even though I can see the logic of it, I just want to know what are and I don't have enough time because of life and my TV watching and my job to grapple with it all. But what is the real implication if Hegel is right? I mean, if this really does hold, what does it mean? What does it mean for everything?
That the universe was eternal, not created.
Yeah.
So that's why some theologians don't like him. Guess which ones?
Yeah, but even there though, what does it really? I mean, it almost leaves you with a so what? It's like, okay, I get it. So what?
Well,
what implication does it have on anything?
Oh yeah, totally get it.
If it's just what it is,
Yeah. No, I totally get that.
Well,
I grapple with that for years, and I always ask all my professors of Hegel, so assuming all this is true, so what?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, though, if it strikes you, or if you comprehend it, or I don't know how to say this, but if it strikes you as being really, really true, that this really is the way things are, then you at least have the comfort or the surety or whatever it is of knowing that you understand reality and how it is structured in a very fundamental and genuine and true manner.
And it's only because you've grasped it's only because you've grasped the necessity of this thought. And
Yeah.
I think in philosophy, there's always a whole bunch of different positions out there. And
Well, isn't that always the goal of every philosopher?
Well,
To try to give the best
yeah.
explanation.
Right. And the point is that a lot of positions out there just won't be satisfying because you're going to see where the contingencies have crept in, and so in a sense you won't be duped by mere ideologies because you recognize their inner limitations.
Right.
And so that positions you, so to speak, from a position, and then you can, so to speak, act confidently in the world. You could stride confidently through the world.
But and this could get off really quickly, but I mean, really, what Hegel leaves me with is a negative, not a positive, right? It's all the positives that are the problem. It's the negative that Hegel leaves us with, and so you really can't do much with the negative, except the positives.
It's ironic that this chapter mentions the first positivity, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Well, I think that there is this. In the culmination of all of Hegel's works, and the culmination of the phenomenology, and the culmination of the logic, and the culmination of the philosophy of right, it is the attaining of this insight and the implications for human existence that are briefly evoked in each one of these things. But because Hegel doesn't take it to be possible. He thinks it's bad philosophy for a philosopher to be a moralist and to tell people how they should live, but rather he wants to improve their self-understanding so that in acting on the basis of an adequate self-understanding rather than an inadequate one, right? That their actions are meaningful realization of the potentialities of the world rather than just errancy and mistakes. So there is a certain element that he doesn't want to anticipate and prevent certain possibilities from being realized. He knows that time goes on after Hegel, and anyway, so that does have some interesting implications for how we understand ourselves when we act politically and when we act socially and ethically. That Hegel will get to, but that's a long way down the road. Yes.
There was a chapter in Don Quixote that was suppressed by the Counter-Reformation. It's where the Don Quixote meets Hegel and talks about knight errancy.
Knight's errancy.
I mean, one of the implications, I think Hegel, I don't know if Hegel mentions it. I think he does at some point, but I mean, it has, when it comes to discourse, dialogue, one of the things Hegel shows is that you really do have to get inside someone else's thought. You can't confront them from the outside and simply say, my account is right, your account is wrong. You have to sort of get into why they think their account is better than yours and show on its own assumptions how it's self-undermining.
Yeah, that is,
Exactly.
I think that's the whole reason the book we're reading, and that's exactly what he's trying to do in the phenomenology of spirit, is not simply promulgate his philosophy and say, this is the right one. Don't you see it? Isn't it beautiful? I mean, what he's doing is, let's take your point of view and run it to its logical end.
Right.
Right.
Can I just make one point? I see Bo more than anybody else, like, grasp Hegel and at each individual level, and then think through exactly how he's conceived the mind and action and psychology, and work his way through a bunch of inadequate psychologies that he's before thought were relevant to him and the way he was orienting his life according to these different psychologies. And now he's seen their, their inner limitations and some of the reasons why they failed and all the rest of it. So that's just like using the Hegelian concept to explore and open up the insufficiencies of things that one took for granted as being relevant to one's life, right? And then by virtue of critiquing them and critiquing them, not just negating them, but understanding, what their real functionality is and what their limitations are, right? You've built them into your life without being a slave to them, without being in some kind of an uncomprehending subservience to them. And in a sense, one's surmounted them by integrating them. And that is a very, very Hegelian way of a human individual engaging with the world.
Thank you, Michael. Yes,
Great.
something to do. All right.
So I just want to give that as an example of what I'm talking about. Sorry, Tim, I kind of interrupted you. Do you want to?
No, that's okay. I mean, I'm still going to be grappling with this as I understand Hegel more, but I'm not sure, I don't know how to apply that, what you just said exactly, and what Tyler and Bo just said exactly, because I basically have to and I know this is not the right term, obviously not a Hegelian term. I have to deconstruct myself in terms of Hegelian logic before I really have any basis on which to deconstruct anybody else's thought on anything. But really, I mean, that's not even the right way to put it, because their thoughts are the same thoughts. I mean, it's my thoughts.
Yes.
It's all the same. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to
I
drag
think
it off too
it's
much.
not that you have to completely understand Hegel to go about doing that. Hegel's point is that you have that capacity and you can develop it. And so you don't have to get all the way through Hegel or Kant or even do philosophy at all to recognize some things are contradictions. Some accounts become incoherent in their own terms, right? And as you get better at making it explicit why things are rendered incoherent, you start to recognize in other people's accounts and even in your own accounts that you previously thought were true, where that incoherency is. So you can listen to, anybody listening to a lot of like opinion pieces on news channels, right, is going to recognize there's like a flood of non sequiturs coming at you.
Yeah, but there's a difference between Hegelian logic and postmodern logic, right? Because postmodern logic is all about looking at something from a different perspective. That's not really what Hegel is doing.
Right.
Hegel's is more thoroughgoing.
It's
and I'm
not
just
a
not
matter
sure
of perspective is the main
at
point.
this point. I'm still not sure where it leaves, and does it give anything positive to land on? That's what I'm wondering at this point.
By the way,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the next paragraph, and
Okay.
it's great at how we're logically already getting to what's next.
Oh, cool.
It's really neat, It shows how much we really care about the text. That it's lying right there in front of us.
Should we dare to do a second paragraph today?
Text and not read it.
I don't know if we're going to be able to actually screw it up, but if we read it, it might be fun.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Who wants to read?
I'll give it a try.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Now because the pure essentiality of things, like their difference, belongs to reason, we can no longer really talk of things at all, which is to say, we can no longer speak of what for consciousness would only be the negative of itself. For the main categories are species of the pure category, which is to say that the pure category is still their genus or essence and is not opposed to them. However, the many categories are already equivocation itself, since at the same time they have in themselves otherness in its plurality as opposed to the pure category. they in fact contradict the pure category through this plurality, and the pure unity must sublate them into themselves, and thereby constitute itself as the negative unity of the differences. However, as negative unity, it excludes from itself both the differences as such, and that first immediate pure unity as such, and it is singular individuality. This is a new category, which is an excluding consciousness, which is to say it has an other for it. Wow. Singular individuality is its transition out of its concepts into an external reality. It is the pure schema, which is just as much consciousness as it is thereby singularity and an excluding one, a pointing towards an other. However, tell me when you want to stop. However, these others of this category are only other categories mentioned for the first time, namely pure essentiality and pure difference. And in this category, i.e., in the very positiveness of the other, or in this other itself, consciousness is equally itself. Each of these different moments points to another moment, but at the same time, within each of them, there is never any otherness at all. The pure category refers to the species, which passes over into the negative category or into individuality. However, this latter refers back to them. It is itself pure consciousness, which within each of them remains this clear unity with itself. However, this clear unity with itself is just as much directed to another, which, while it has vanished, is engendered all over again. Okay.
Let's start from the top.
Yeah.
But Peter, you had a question first.
Yeah, it's yes. As we read through this thing, I mean, singular individuality seems to be an important thing, new thing that arises here, and I'm just wondering, is that sort of, in some sense, the next individual, next step in? You have the concept, the category, and singular individuality seems to be only dependent on the fact that there can be many subcategories, as it were. Given that one fact, not any particular subcategory is necessary, but then singularity is sort of the next concrete, as it were, development from the category. I'm sort of trying to figure out that lineage. That's just a background task that I'm trying to trace.
I don't have a good response to that.
No, I didn't expect one. I'm just saying, I'm just trying to tease that out. And if anybody sees any insight into that as we go through the text, then I'd be appreciative.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's look at it. I mean, on the one hand, okay. So when you have a genus and a species, you also have members of the species, right? Which are the so-called individuals. And so the individual, the species, and the genus all seem to go together. Go ahead, Peter.
At this point, we have not mentioned any particular concrete individual, species, or genus.
Right.
Just talking in the abstract.
Right. But a species is not the species of anything, isn't a species. And so
but all we have is the relationship of species to genus, that thing, not any particular other.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of understood the singular individuality as being, intrinsic to.
Forget my question. Let's just go through it, and it'll.
No, but that's a point I wanted to raise anyway. But yeah, okay. Okay, so does everybody feel more?
Things, the first sentence, we can't talk of things because things implies it's outside of reason, so to speak, or outside of thought. And all this stuff is really already inside it, right? Is that the main point of that first sentence?
That's right. So things are what consciousness is not. And now we're past that. Jesus Christ. I keep trying to do, and I just fuck it up.
Is that your phone going off, Michael?
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on, but nothing important.
So I think Peter.
There are no things going on.
Yeah, exactly. No, okay, so I think we all get the thing point, but if anybody wants to rehearse it or talk about it, let's do it.
No, Peter covered it really nicely, I think.
Okay,
Right.
so, and now we get the explanatory for the many categories are species of the pure category, which is to say that the pure category is still their genus or essence, right? So the pure category is in the species and not outside the species. And the species is not the negation of the genus, and the genus is not the negation of the species. And it's not opposed to them. However, okay, but now we do get a kind of opposition, but it's not the opposition between genus and species, it's the opposition between one and the many, right? Okay, the many categories are already equivocation itself. What's the German in that? Oh yeah, okay, so they're already, but the many are the ambiguity. All right, that equivocation itself, that's fine. Since at the same time they have in themselves otherness in its plurality as opposed to the pure category, right? They're many, it's one, that creates the opposition. So here we don't have a matter of content, but we have a matter of an internal difference, a categorical difference within the category. But that means that it's different from itself. Just like the eye equals eyes, different from itself, and thereby is the same as itself. We saw that before. Is everybody more or less comfortable with what I've just said? Because I don't want to go past any questions.
Yeah, I don't start getting questions until it gets down to,
Okay.
yeah, a little bit lower.
Okay. They in fact contradict the pure category through this plurality, and the pure unity must sublate them in themselves, and thereby constitute itself as the negative unity of the differences.
And this is where I think the genesis of the singular individual is coming up.
Right, right. So somebody just take a stab. We've talked about negative unities before, but just like rehearse this. Now, the pure category constitutes itself as the negative unity of the differences. How would you unpack that? Anybody just want to take a stab at it just for practice sake?
Do negative unity. So positive unity is this is what's included, and a negative unity is this is what's excluded, right?
One way to think of it is a positive unity has otherness outside of itself, and a negative unity has otherness inside itself.
Ooh, that's nice. Okay.
Right. I mean, so that whole game we played with the subject and object and that yielding infinite difference, right, is now being played out in a specific domain, namely the domain of the relationship between genus and species. Okay. However, as negative unity, it excludes from itself both the differences as such, right, it sublates them, and that first immediate pure unity, the one without any differences. And it is singular individuality. And we just have to stop and try to grok that.
Ooh.
And also why he says it's the first immediate pure unity. That's why I was saying, wondering if there's a direct connection between category and the immediately, I guess, but what's the first immediate pure unity? Oh, that's an immediate unity.
Isn't that the first positivity that we began with, that he called the category?
The first positivity was the relationship, was the positing of being and self-consciousness as
Right.
one.
And he called that the category. And that's just
here
pure.
We're going though to individuality.
I just want to say that thing is now finally negated. And it's through the dual negation that we have the singular individuality, but we just have to, I mean, I can say that, but I still don't completely comprehend it. And so that's why I'm hoping we can discuss it some.
Well, isn't he talking here about this infinite equivocation? I mean, he does use the word equivocation up in the paragraph.
Right.
And now we have a singular individuality, which is an excluding consciousness. It has an other for it, but that other for it is really the same as, you know, it's, you know, so it's like this equivocation between difference and unity. I mean, this, in a way, this is nothing new.
Right.
Michael, what did you say about positive unity and negative unity again?
Oh, just that positive unity is that unity that has otherness outside of itself, and negative unity is that which has otherness inside or internal to itself.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, did anybody read any secondary literature on this? You know, I do still stumble a bit in Hegel's use of singular individuality or individuality, and that I stumble around a little bit. I'm not quite sure exactly what he's referring to when it comes up. All right. Part of me wants to go to that completely determined, the completely determined concept that Tim brought up with reference to Kant, right? And since that is there can only be one of those because there can be nothing external to it, right? And so it's necessarily but one. It's necessarily the individual, and I sense that something like that is evoked here, but on the other hand, he's going to then talk about it as if this singular individual has something actually outside of it.
And it has a specific other, I think, outside of it, he says in the next sentence or two, right?
Okay, let's get there. This is a new category, which is an excluding consciousness, right? Singular individuality, excluding consciousness, right? Which is to say it has an other for it.
I don't know how much it in particular or just in general another.
Right.
I was saying, is it its own particular other?
This may not be helpful, but I can't help but think of Schmidt and just the act of distinction, right? So I read this and I think of what's going on here is just the very basic act of making a distinction.
Okay, that's very possible.
So the screen moved and I lost track of where I was looking.
Oh, I'm sharing another document of secondary literature on this. Here's what Kalkovich is saying about this. That's why. Do you want me to go back to the other one?
Yeah, just so that Tyler can complete his thought. That would be great.
Boom. There you go. Oh,
yeah. 230. Yeah, 230. Where were we?
We're on page 140.
There we go.
All right, thanks. Okay, transition out of its concepts into an external reality. So if we think of something like the apperception in Kant, and he says it's the pure schema. And I'm not entirely sure what to do with that term, but if we understand it in Kantian terms, this is not, I don't think it's an individual as a complete life. It is the individual, it is the bare consciousness of another as external to itself. And he says, okay, it's an excluding one, a pointing towards another. So why I bring up Schmidt is the act of distinction, right? Is the exclusion of self from the self. And that is at the same time a pointing towards another. So these others of this category are only the other categories mentioned for the first time: pure essentiality and pure difference. So
Mm-hmm.
The pure difference is why I again go back to Schmidt and distinction.
This excluding a self from self. Is that like if you take a circle like this is myself. This is myself here, the circle, and I make a distinction and I've excluded self from self.
Hold on, let me pin your video and show it. Go
That's
ahead,
the for itself and itself split.
No, I don't think that.
go ahead, Peter. You're now seen by everybody.
Well, I mean, I'm always seeing everybody because I have a good view.
No, but your picture's a little bit bigger, so when you point your pencil to your circle,
Well,
we can.
I just
Yeah.
drew a circle. This is before the distinction. This is the thing that's distinguished. This is the thing before the distinction, and after the distinction, it has two sides. So it's distinguishing self from self, the left part of itself from the right part of itself, or whatever. Is that a bad understanding of? Well, how bad? In what way is that bad?
I kind of see that. I see this as this. It's almost, to me, I don't see what's new here. It's almost like the same old.
Song and
The
dance.
same. The unity is the difference. The unity is
Mhm.
the unity is the difference. Is the unity is the difference. It's this oscillation.
Right.
back and forth. So I'm not sure what's new here. Can anybody see what's new? He says it's a new category, but I think that's only within the oscillation. And he says things appearing for the first time, two different things, but I think still that's only within the oscillation. It's not really within the overall logic of the book. It's not new within the overall logic of the book.
It just seems to me like what's going on here, but is that from the very idea of a pure category, right? Thinking the nature of pure category, right? We get, so to speak, from inside of it, this internal difference, which is the many species, and the negation of the empty category, which makes it, which says makes it a singular individuality. And I guess I kind of want to say, once we're this far along, now we have not just pure category, but a specific category, not just a pure category with some species, right? But now we have a concrete content that is a specific category.
Is that only after the speciation happens, as it were?
Well, I see that. I see what you're saying, and I think so. The point is that we've got the speciation, and then we have through the speciation we have the negation of the abstract empty category, right? And so now the internal structure has become more complex, and it's given that. And that the unity of this complexity is a specific category, right? And so in a sense, it's the nature of the pure category to specify itself categorically, right? And that's what makes it an individual as over against other individual categories. Go ahead, Peter.
Because there's this sense we haven't quite gotten to it. I think it's the next one. However, these others of this category are only other categories mentioned for the first time, namely pure essentiality, pure difference.
Yeah, so
that seems like those are the first two other categories of
right.
Speciations or something like that.
Yeah, maybe the new thing here is just it's really, I mean, this is kind of a continuing commentary on Kant, assuming that, schema, he's saying that schema is not something external. It is, in fact, consciousness itself. And we really only have two things that are the same. One is pure essentiality and one is pure difference. And so he's still kind of consolidating Kant here.
Mm-hmm. Now, the others of this category are only other categories. Right? So that's
But other categories mentioned for the first time.
That's not even in Hegel. Hegel doesn't talk about mentioning anything. I don't even know why he says it this way. I mean, literally, the German is sorry. Only a pointing towards. Hinterhin auf ein anderes. Aber diese Cat. This other of these categories are only the other first categories, namely pure essence and pure difference.
Oh, so the others first categories.
This other of this category are other first categories.
Oh, wow. So that's a pretty bad translation then.
Yeah. I didn't realize how bad until we really dug into the details. That just shows that Pinkerton isn't quite Neoplatonist enough to understand this passage.
Oh.
So, I mean, the Miller says, the singular individual is the transition of the category from its notion to an external,
Point sentence.
but as negative unity, it excludes from itself both the differences as such, as well as that first immediate pure unity as such, and is a singular individual.
Well, that's all the way up top. That's not the mentioned for the first time thing.
The singular individual is the which one? The singular individual is the transition of the category from its notion into an external reality, the pure schema, which is both consciousness, and since it is singular individual and an exclusive unit, the pointing to another.
And then what happens? Because now we're getting
this quote, other of the category is merely the other first mentioned categories, viz. Pure essentiality and pure difference.
See, I just think this mention that they're interpolating here, A, it's not in the text, and B, what it helps, what it prevents you from understanding is that every category contains all the other categories in it. And you take any one of those other categories, they're all first categories, right? They're all fundamental determinations of the identity of thought and being. So it has nothing to do with mentioning here. It has to do with the inner nature of the category to have the other categories be its element, and that those other categories have it as their elements. And so they include each other. They have this relationship that we've been studying the whole time, this relation of internality. I mean, that's how I understand. I mean, I don't know, we need to look at some secondary literature in the next 2 weeks and see if we come up with a different interpretation. But I understand this as this this internality relation that he's making. And I think he has to make it because no content of thought, of the identity of thought and being can come from outside of this identity. And so all the categories that are the bases for understanding anything can come to the category from outside of itself.
Konkovich very much covers this, and he says that schema is Hegel's word for the transition from inner to outer. And boy, this whole section is really nice. And he goes into Kant and everything and all this stuff, and goes into Kant's errors. But I really like the discussion up above about the I equal I, and the thing you just made clear to us, Michael, in your picture. Konkovich is definitely covers up here. But there it is on page 161 in The Logic of Desire. There it is. Maybe I'll study it more and help us next time. Because we're at 413 right now.
Gentlemen, it's after 4. I've got to head out myself. So
Sorry, can I just ask, is anybody pretty completely lost at this point? I mean, Charlie, I know that you haven't gone through the rigors of Hegel with us very long, but I just want to know if this is scratching the surface of anything meaningful for you or not, or if it's just
I would say
intellectual masturbation.
Yeah. No, I'd say I am thoroughly puzzled.
Well, philosophy begins in puzzlement.
That's exactly.
I'll just have to. I don't know. I was very much like Tim, that when I read this, that it's the same, positive, negative, and all